Hey guys, welcome to this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday. Now before we begin, if you're new to the channel, welcome and thank you for joining us. Now what these videos are all about is answering your unique health-related questions. So if you have a question concerning your health in general, diet, nutrition, herbalism, supplements, really anything related to health and wellness, and you would like our help in answering those questions, all you need to do is leave those questions in the comment section below. Then we go back, we browse those comments, and we select the questions that are going to be the most frequent or reoccurring, questions that sometimes we haven't covered yet maybe, questions that we think that are going to be the most beneficial to the whole community, and of course questions that we are capable of providing an honest answer to. Something else really great about these videos is that we select a winner from the comment section below to receive a free bag of tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms. Now you don't even need to have a question to enter to win. All you need to do is make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up, and just drop a comment in the comment section below, and that will give you one entry to winning. And the way that you know you have won is that by next week, so after this video, we're going to go back a week from now and we're going to select our winner, and you'll know you have won because we will have responded to you and tell you to send us an email. And with all that being said, let's get to this week's questions. All right, so getting to our first question, this is going to be a really interesting one and a topic that we haven't yet covered on our YouTube channel, but I actually cover it on my personal YouTube channel, so I'm going to recommend that video at the end of answering your question. But the question reads, I'm severely anemic along with having leukemia. What would you recommend? So I'm actually personally excited to answer this question because the whole topic of anemia is one of these very taboo, almost conspiracy-like topics. What we've been taught about anemia is completely false and backwards. And you might be surprised to find out that your doctor's recommendations or the general recommendation for correcting anemia might be actually giving you anemia and even leukemia. It could be a contributing factor. So it's not surprising that you're mentioning both of these things in one, anemia and leukemia. So I'm gonna first and foremost just break down what anemia actually is. And then I wanna get into why consuming more iron, which is the general recommendation, would be the worst thing that you could do, actually. So anemia is not an iron deficiency. Most people think, oh, I'm anemic. What does that mean? I have an iron deficiency. Wrong. Anemia has nothing to do with an iron deficiency. If anything, an iron deficiency would be beneficial for correcting anemia. Anemia is specifically the problem of your red blood cells breaking down significantly more rapidly than they are being reproduced. So anemia is actually a red blood cell deficiency, not an iron deficiency. And the whole idea is that iron can help to correct the red blood cell deficiency, when in fact all iron does is through a toxic effect is it can stimulate your red blood cells to produce more of them, but it doesn't correct the ratio. It doesn't correct the fact that the red blood cells are still breaking down rapidly. And what's really interesting is iron being a toxic heavy metal. It's a toxic substance. It actually triggers a toxic inflammatory response in the body because of its general reactivity with your cells and unsaturated fats in your body and things like vitamin E. For example, iron can destroy vitamin E, and vitamin E is actually essential for regulating the production and destruction of red blood cells. So just take a look at something that's made of metal, out in nature. What happens when iron gets on it? Have you ever used a cast iron skillet and it starts to oxidize? You see the iron accumulation and the orangish color that occurs like on the cast iron skillet. This is what iron does to your body and cells. It actually increases the rate of lipid peroxidation, so it oxidizes and destroys your cells and tissues. It's a very volatile substance. It is going to increase the damage done by free radicals. And one way it does this, other than being a reactive, toxic heavy metal, is that it directly destroys vitamin E in your body. And again, vitamin E is essential for regulating the whole production and destruction of the red blood cells. So if anything, anemia is probably more associated with an excess of iron, and if there's any nutritional deficiency, it's likely a vitamin E deficiency. Now getting into the topic of leukemia, I won't get into too much depth here, but I'll give you some resources you can check out for yourself. Back in like 1984, researchers actually started to suspect that the increased rates of leukemia had a lot to do with all the fortified iron that were being added to children's cereals and cereal foods and a lot of the foods that children consume, dramatically increasing the rate of peroxidation or lipid peroxidation in the body, which can lead to leukemia. So remember, leukemia is cancer of the blood. And what does iron do to the blood cell? It destroys it. It's going to, on one hand, stimulate the production of red blood cells by causing a toxic response. And really anything will do that. Any toxic substance will cause your body to rapidly create more red blood cells. But the complete whole picture of iron is that through its destruction of vitamin E, it's actually going to contribute to anemia and the breaking down of the red blood cells and the oxidation of the red blood cells, and that could lead to mutations that lead to leukemia. So pretty much all cancers are related to intense oxidative stress. I believe it was either Albert St. Georgi or Hans Selye that discovered that cancer was really just the byproduct of chronic cellular stress. So anything that chronically stresses your cells out, leading to oxidative stress, will cause cancer. And iron could be one of these contributing factors in this way because it does contribute to a dramatic increase of oxidative stress to the cell. So in summary, anemia is more likely caused by an excess of iron, a deficiency in vitamin E, and for women, the reason why women tend to get anemia more than men has nothing to do with iron, but it has everything to do with the functioning of the thyroid and the fact that women tend to have excess estrogen. And estrogen actually dilutes the blood, resulting in a lower hemoglobin count than men. And also, estrogen tends to oppose thyroid function, and thyroid is essential for the production of carbon dioxide, which is responsible for oxygen consumption. It detaches oxygen from the hemoglobin, so that way hemoglobin and red blood cells can be used and transported throughout the body. So the fact of the matter is you're likely hypothyroid or chronically hypothyroid. You probably have really high estrogen and actually probably have an excess of iron. If you've been taking iron supplements to correct your anemia and then you got leukemia, that is probably one of the major contributing factors, to be honest. So what I would recommend is, first and foremost, very simple, do not take any more iron supplements. Try to limit your intake of iron-rich foods. You should be able to get more than enough iron through just consuming 2 ounces of grass-fed beef liver per week. You only need a small amount of it. And you want to also make sure you're getting that copper in there as well to sort of mitigate some of the iron. But you don't really need to focus too much on getting that much iron. If you're consuming beef or beef liver, you're getting more than your fair share. So try to reduce your intake of iron. In addition to that, I would focus on consuming more vitamin E. And liver is actually a good source of vitamin E, in addition to egg yolks. And those are great thyroid foods. They're anti-estrogen. Actually, vitamin E is an antagonist to estrogen amongst the other fat-soluble vitamins. So egg yolks and liver would be very practical and therapeutic foods for all of these issues. And then last but not least, directly learning about the thyroid and how to lower estrogen. So watch our videos on thyroid function. We're always giving tips here. Ashwagandha is a premier thyroid herb, one of the best thyroid herbs. But one of the major reasons people get hypothyroidism is excess estrogen. So definitely watch all of our videos related to estrogen and apply those tips. But I think a good place to start for right now would be to find a high quality vitamin E, ideally from an unadulterated wheat germ oil or something that you could maybe even use topically, and reduce your intake of iron and stop any supplementation of iron supplements. And lastly, be sure to watch the video on my YouTube channel that talks about this danger of iron in excess in greater detail. All right, so getting to our second question. This question reads, I've always worked out, but now I have started intermittent fasting and it's made a big difference. What do you think of it? I do a 16-hour fast and an 8-hour eating excerpt for Saturday and Sunday where I do not intermittent fast. I also started taking ashwagandha and maca root, which have both been excellent to how I feel. I'm 53. The information is excellent. Thank you. All right, so the first thing I'm just going to comment on is when you say that intermittent fasting has made a big difference, I guess you would have to clarify what differences. So are you losing weight? Do you have more energy? What are the differences you're noticing? Because overall, if you're not familiar with our channel, I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting or fasting in general, beyond maybe the normal, 8 to 9 hours you're fasting while you're sleeping, due to a couple of different reasons. But the basic is that fasting to a greater extent usually induces a stress response. So it's always really been considered to be a stressful situation. Most things that induce some sort of pain at all are going to trigger and initiate a stress response. But the whole idea behind promoting intermittent fasting is largely due to the underlying idea that stress is good, that you should experience some stress, like you should want to catabolize your body to a certain degree, that this is beneficial. But I think that anything beyond the 8 hours you're fasting while you're sleeping, all it does is really put your body in a more chronic sympathetic state. And the way I explain this is through the basic physiology of what's happening to your metabolism when you fast that I see few people ever talk about. They never really explain the science or the chemistry of what it takes to start to produce these alternative substrates like ketone bodies to become a fat burner. And when you look at it, it's very obvious that it's not necessarily health promoting. So the first thing I'll just explain is that to intermittent fast or to fast, typically to reap the benefits that people are promoting, what you have to first do is use up all of the glycogen or stored sugar in your body. So glycogen is stored glucose. The primary sources of glycogen are going to be in your liver and in your muscle tissue. So when you enter a state of fasting, you're not really fasting until you've used up all the liver glycogen. That's the whole point. So you don't necessarily fast until all of that stuff is used up. Just like a hibernating animal or bear, they fast essentially, but they're not truly in the fasted state until they've basically used up all of their glycogen stores. And what this does is once the liver glycogen has been all used up in the muscle glycogen, this initiates what people call as fasting, a fasted state. And a physiologist would refer to this as lipolysis. Lipolysis is what state you're in, metabolically speaking, when you are fasting. And it literally refers to the process of your body freeing up stored fat cells, so liberating fat from your tissues to start to break those down and sort of reverse through the Krebs cycle to turn into sugar. So what's interesting is that even in lipolysis, until you get into ketosis, when you're in lipolysis, which is usually what your metabolism is functioning from when you're in this intermittent fasted state, you're usually in lipolysis, where you're trying to use fat as energy. Now people say that it's more efficient, there's less oxidative stress, but that's actually completely false. Because what happens when you liberate, in order to even liberate these fats, these stored fats, what has to happen is, chemically speaking or biologically speaking, your liver, once the glycogen's all used up, is your liver sends a message to your pituitary gland. And it says, hey, we have no stored sugar. Start freeing up the fat in our body so that way we can live off our fat reserves, just like a hibernating bear. So the pituitary does something and it sends a signal to your adrenal glands. It tells your adrenals to secrete a hormone known as adrenaline or norepinephrine. So adrenaline or norepinephrine, which is a classic stress hormone, starts to liberate or mobilize the fat from your body. Now what's interesting is the fat is comprised of two major components, glycerol backbones and fatty acids. Now in the metabolism, only those glycerols can be turned back, can reverse through the Krebs cycle, become pyruvate, and then ultimately become glucose or sugar again, or glycogen. So those fatty acids actually just circulate through the bloodstream. And for most people, these fatty acids are unsaturated or mostly unsaturated. And this is problematic for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, just to paint a picture, the liberation or elevation of liberated fatty acids is one of the key biomarkers of a diabetic. One way you can test to find out if you're diabetic, beyond like blood sugar testing, which is usually inaccurate, is the elevation of free circulating fatty acids. That shows that somebody is not oxidizing glucose, no matter how much they're consuming or not, and instead their body's sort of catabolizing itself, and the byproduct, again, of breaking down those fats and turning the glycerols into sugar is that those free fatty acids just circulate. So other than being a major biomarker of diabetes, those free fatty acids tend to have many overlapping effects with estrogen. In many cases, if they're unsaturated fat, they will stimulate the production of estrogen, but they also have similar effects to estrogen. For example, the circulating fatty acids from chronic lipolysis can directly block the transport of thyroid hormone throughout the body. So they can bind with, just like estrogen, they can bind with the thyroid binding globulin hormone. And what they can do is interfere with the thyroid attaching to that binding globulin and transporting throughout the body. So that's a complex way of saying that they have a mechanism that blocks thyroid function. And in fact, it's well known that entering a state of lipolysis, when you are fasting, your thyroid function down regulates. In fact, that's all fasting does. Overall, in the grand scheme of things, all fasting is doing is slowing your metabolic rate, slowing it down. Now, the reason why you feel good on the short term, well, in order to be in this whole state I just described, you need to be producing adrenaline. In fact, it's well known that lipolysis is initiated by adrenaline and norepinephrine. There are studies, if you're somebody that knows biology, you know this. But again, not a lot of people know this stuff. That to be in a fasted state is literally a biochemical stress state, a metabolic stress. You have to be producing the adrenal stress hormones to liberate the fats. And the problem here is that on the short term, a lot of people confuse the stress high, the adrenaline high of lipolysis or fasting with true well-being. So it's actually just a stress high you're feeling from it, and it's adrenaline high. Literally, you're high off of adrenaline. And that's not necessarily going to promote well-being in the long term. In fact, this whole process is just slowing the metabolic rate, as I said. In fact, it's well known that chronic lipolysis slows the metabolic rate, which is observed by the decreased production of carbon dioxide, meaning that less carbon dioxide is the best indicator that the thyroid is low, because the thyroid is what produces carbon dioxide or drives its production. And it can also lead to other confusing benefits such as weight loss. I think that's one of the biggest ones for people, is like, other than feeling the adrenaline high and thinking that this is like true energy, is the fact that you can lose weight, you'll become shredded. And the way that I explain this is, well, diabetics lose weight, cancer patients lose weight, people with autoimmune diseases like AIDS become very thin and lose weight, but it's all because of the chronic production of stress hormones. So if you fast long enough, you'll lose a lot of weight. It's not in a healthy way though, it's because of the chronic production of adrenaline and cortisol, which start to catabolize your fat stores and even your muscles tissue over the long term, and skin tissue and your organs and your thymus gland. In fact, fasting will lead to the direct suppression of the immune system by catabolizing or atrophying the thymus gland, which is the most important gland for immune function. And it's one of the first organs to be turned into sugar after you're in a fasted state long enough. So in no way do I actually think that fasting is a good way to improve your health. There are incidences, of course, where people, their digestive systems are so messed up from stress, from eating a bad diet, and all of their lifestyle choices and dietary choices, that once they stop doing everything that's ruining their health, they feel better. But the fasting that's a very bad solution. In my mind, fasting is sort of an extreme that's akin to like cutting off your foot if you have gout, instead of actually boosting the immune system so that way your body can heal the toe. Certainly you're going to feel better if you cut off the foot, but I look at a lot of fad dieting, things like the keto diet, fasting, as sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to have some benefits if you're removing all of the causative factors, but there's a more appropriate, in my opinion at least, a more intelligent way to achieve those effects without necessarily having to go to the extremes of not eating. So you might have to just figure out what's the underlying thing that was causing your issues in the first place, because I'm just being honest that sticking to a long-term diet that's replicating fasting, all it's going to do is, in the long term, increase oxidative stress, increase aging overall, and all through the stimulation or overstimulation of the adrenal glands. So I don't necessarily recommend it. It's good that you're taking the ashwagandha because that'll help with the thyroid function, but keep in mind that the basic thing that your thyroid needs to convert the inactive form into the active form is glucose. So if you're fasting, or if you're too low calorie, too low carb, it's likely your body is not going to have as much glucose as it would prefer to actually convert the thyroid hormone. So in many ways, a fasted diet, a fasting-like diet, intermittent fasting, all these things are going to just attribute to opposing good thyroid function, and you're just going to kind of be battling yourself all the time. So I think there's smarter ways to achieve anything you'd want to achieve on a diet like that without necessarily having to rely on fat-burning, stressful hormones just to do it. So that's my viewpoint on it, my take on it, looking at from more as unbiased as I can get from a physiological perspective, just what happens in the metabolism. Again, I would ask yourself this: what problems are you trying to solve by doing that diet? Or another way of looking at, what benefits are you trying to reap? There are likely healthier, more physiologically sound ways to do that. It might not be as easy or quick of a fix. I think that's the other thing people like about fasting, is this just such a quick fix. Any person I've ever seen with that fasted mindset is just like, well, I can just fast, to solve my issues. If I stress out or if I binge eat or something, or if I eat junk food, I can just fast it all away. And what they fail to realize is the damaging catabolistic effects that can have in the long term. So that'd be my viewpoint on it. I would recommend not doing it. I would just recommend focusing on the diet that is generally easier to digest. Removing all harmful, toxic, well-known inflammatory foods, all of the grains and legumes, anything basically made by Monsanto, the polyunsaturated fats, the vegetable oils, all of your junk food, the heavily processed foods, focus on removing those things. Those are the real culprits and the foods that are destroying most people's guts and metabolisms. And then from that point, in my viewpoint, a healthy diet is one that's easy to digest and one that energizes you. So one that's going to basically give you more energy than it takes away. And you don't necessarily have to starve yourself to eat a diet that would boost your metabolic rate and that would give you more energy and that's easy to digest. There's ways to do that. There's ways to reap those benefits without, again, having to rely on fasting, intermittent fasting, or restrictive low-calorie diets that in no way can actually be attributing to good health. There's no way that feels comfortable. At a certain point in time, what happens is the adrenaline, the cortisol becomes so high that you enter this euphoric stress high, and all of a sudden fasting feels really good. And people associate that again as some sort of positive thing. But all that's happened is that you've just produced so much stress hormones that you're kind of numb to the pain of starvation. So I know this is kind of maybe a negative viewpoint on it. I'm not trying to bash it. I'm just trying to look at intermittent fasting for what it actually is, metabolically speaking. But do your own research, look into it, look at all angles of it. What you'll come to find at the root of it is basically a debate between whether it's better to have a high metabolism, a high metabolic rate, or a low metabolic rate. That's kind of the great debate between these two viewpoints. So it's a lot of information, I know, but again, just look into it for yourself. Maybe take what I said into consideration and do some additional research. Look into lipolysis. Look into what your cells need to produce energy. Study the Krebs cycle. Study oxidative metabolism. Find out how your body makes energy and then eat from that point. I typically just tell people, forget diets and the fads. Just listen to your body and learn as much as you can about your body. If you have a high reality with your body, meaning you know how it works and what it needs, it'll be easier to give it what it needs. So learn about your physiology, learn about your biology, learn about the metabolism, learn about the digestive system, learn about all of the organs first. Invest your time into learning about that subject matter rather than maybe just reading a diet book per se. And then from there, you'll come to your own conclusions. All right, guys, that brings this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday to a close. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Remember, if you're interested in winning some free herbs or mushrooms, all you have to do to be entered to win is subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, and drop a health-related question or just any old comment in the comment section below. Also, remember, we have tons of additional resources on our website. We have a blog full of wonderful information. We have an online wellness academy with online health courses that dive into detail about various health-related subjects and give you very pragmatical step-by-step solutions for correcting a couple of very prevalent health issues. We also have an online tonic herb shop where we teach you all about the various herbs. You can learn about different herbs that we talk about here on the channel and of course supplement with them. So be sure to check out those resources as well, all which you can find in the description box below.